The member from York Simcoe.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is certainly an opportunity I welcome to be able to take a few minutes and talk about the initiative by the government on an Ontario registered pension plan. In this case, we're looking at Bill 186. And I've certainly come to this conversation with some ideas that are going to be of no surprise. I have been critical of the manner in which this has been presented, the target audience, the timelines. But what I want to start with is the fact that my concerns reflect the genuine concern that Ontarians, Ontario businesses, my caucus, and I share about this proposal and its effect on the well-being of the province. We know through public discourse, businesses from around the province, and even a Ministry of Finance document, that this proposal is truly a job killer. The ministry document states that over 50,000 jobs in Ontario will be lost, while some industries will never recover. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business forecasts the same negative impacts on our economy if the Ontario pension is installed. One constant is that no one is saying that the pension plan will help to create jobs. Businesses in this province have been continually assaulted by this government's increased red tape, increased operating costs in both taxes and hydro rates, along with the fear of a new payroll tax. Some of the most vulnerable businesses do not possess the financial cushion to absorb this proposal. Instead, they see a government bent on squeezing more money from them through any means necessary, including a mandatory pension. Businesses can only pay these when they make a profit. Business can only hire more employees and grow if the government allows them to do so. It is no longer a secret that each and every day companies choose to pass Ontario by and find jurisdictions where growth is possible. We all know that it's impossible to save for retirement if you have no job. This isn't just a message from the opposition bench. Some of the most respected institutions and some of Ontario's largest employers have implored this government to reconsider the proposed new tax. General Motors, Ford, Canadian Tire, Walmart, Magna all worked in concert to formally let the government know of the risks this plan creates. By the way, I should just emphasize that this is unprecedented for industry leaders to come together and at the earliest stages let the government know of the risk this plan creates. These are associations ranging from mining to hospitality, from manufacturers to farmers, all across the board, whether it be different political stripe or industry. They are all in opposition to the Liberal payroll tax. Between skyrocketing energy rates, a looming carbon tax, and your payroll tax, the cost of doing business in Ontario is far too high, and it's costing jobs. Employers in Ontario are telling the government enough is enough. With the Ontario government's rejigging of the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan to slow down its implementation, hopefully we can take this as a sign the government is slowly but surely becoming more realistic about its effect on a weak economy. However, the best course for this ill-conceived plan is to stop the whole thing in its place. The ORPP plan is a tax. The ORPP will apply to anyone without a defined benefit or sufficiently rich defined contribution plan. The premium will be set at 1.9% up to $90,000 of earnings for employees matched by a similar amount paid by employers, for a grand total of $3,286 per worker. A benefit equal to 15% of insurable earnings will be paid, up to $12,815 per year. It begins with 2017 for Ontario's largest corporations, followed by a one-year delayed implementation for medium-sized firms and a two-year delay for small companies. It seems when the Liberals try their hand at something new, they prove they can't get anything right. Green energy, SAMs, and economics is no exception. Simply they don't get it, perhaps they never will. The government has often fought fiercely against the idea of the ORPP is a tax, meanwhile disguising it as a way to help people save. I might just add it parenthetically, a mandatory way for saving. This misses the fundamental point of what a tax is. The definition of taxes is, quote, a compulsory contribution to state revenue, or taxes can be defined as an involuntary fee. The key concept in defining a tax is its compulsion, not its use. It doesn't matter if you spend taxes on closing gas-fired power plants, or health and education, or fighting a war overseas. The only relevant point is that the taxpayer has no choice but to pay. It is mandatory. For determining if the ORPP is a tax, all that counts is that participation is obligatory. Taxes don't just transfer money from people to government, but are the obligatory removal of an individual's freedom to spend that money as they wish. Saying that ORPP contributions are helping Ontarians to save is irrelevant and unproven, since it is quite likely people simply will reduce other saving methods to compensate. If Ontario wants to set up a voluntary pension plan to encourage more saving, that would be a different matter. But the ORPP is compulsory and therefore is properly classified as a tax. The same principle about what a tax is applies to the Ontario Health Premium, one of the first measures introduced by the Liberal government in 2004, and which broke its election promise to not raise taxes. Calling it a premium instead of a tax may make it sound like you're paying for admission to a select club, but all that matters is its compulsion, as goes the same for the cap-and-trade pricing system, which is just a tax on carbon emissions. Relabeling taxes might be good public relations, but it's bad classification taxonomy. Not calling it a tax encourages governments to engage in the fiction of having dedicated levies to fund every type of expenditure, from bridges to roads to debt service, without the burden of a tax. It seems as if the Liberals would like to live in a world where the taxes have been replaced by a slew of contributions, premiums, levies, and user fees, every bit as onerous, but without the distasteful label of taxes. It may come as no surprise that the Liberals are not familiar with the term they know so well. Seeing how the Liberal government has introduced so many new ones or raised the rate on others. These include the ORPP contributions, the harmonized sales tax, higher personal income tax, the healthcare levy, a multitude of environmental levies, and the routine punishment to beer, tobacco, and fuel taxes favored by cash-strapped governments everywhere. Perhaps not understanding what a tax fundamentally represents and how its mandatory nature supersedes spending intent helps explain why this administration keeps raising taxes, unaware of how they slow Ontario's economic growth. Any pension reform should be targeted, not unnecessarily broad-based, a balanced approach. A balanced approach, this will be needed to ensure that the ORPP does not undermine any existing plans and disadvantage Ontario workers and investment. The very real risk is that Ontario workers will be worse off if employers with already attractive pension plans find themselves unable to continue those plans if they are required to include the ORPP. This job-killing payroll tax hinders the ability of the private sector to do what it does best, provide job opportunities for people and strengthen our economy to attract investment. The pension investments must be made with best intention toward the highest returns, free of political interference, and free to invest anywhere across the world. Pension plans are supposed to be done in the best interest of pensioners and must not be restricted. The ORPP is an idea to achieve a hidden motive at a bad time. Despite what the government studies supposedly say, there is no true need for this mandatory payroll contribution. This is true for the following reasons. The plan is unneeded for 4/5 of workers who already have sufficient savings for adequate retirement, as shown by Statistics Canada and McKinsey studies taking into account all forms of savings. Instead, the plan will hurt many families with new taxes as they deal with child-rearing costs and invest in housing equity, which is the most important retirement asset in later life. There are pockets of individuals who need support, such as low-income seniors facing a poverty rate of 20%. A minority of households with modest family incomes below $60,000 do need additional support. Any pension reform should be targeted, not unnecessarily broad-based. The plan unnecessarily extends to many upper-income households with up to $180,000 in income when two earners retire. This is well beyond any reasonable notion of what is meant by middle class, since most upper-income households have the means to ensure a good standard of living. The plan hurts the middle class, yet many middle-class individuals will bear much higher tax rates on plan benefits, especially in the $73,000 to $90,000, as old age security payments are clawed back. So I think that needs to be repeated. The plan hurts the middle class. It's not helping the lowest income, and it also means that old age security will be clawed back. The plan provides a poor return to savings for low-income Canadians who will be provided little personal income tax relief for contributions, yet face a walloping personal tax on benefits, with personal taxes and reductions in guaranteed income supplements. The personal tax treatment of the ORPP is uncertain. If it is treated similarly to other retirement saving plans under the Income Tax Act, the ORPP will provide comparable returns to annuity plans for many middle-income households. If the pension contributions are treated similarly to Canada Pension, only a tiny tax credit based on the low-income tax rate is provided as relief, making the ORPP savings a poor investment for many Ontarians. Although it is argued by the Liberal government that the ORPP will increase savings, it is quite the contrary. There will be a significant reduction in private savings, as many U.S. and Canadian economic studies have suggested in the past, including a recent one by well-respected economist François Vaillancourt at the Université de Montréal. Business will face a new set of taxes on employees, much of it shifted back in lower wages over time. In the short run, companies facing international competition will face higher costs, along with higher Ontario energy costs, property taxes, and new levies to pay for infrastructure. The latter is most critical to achieve growth in the long run, unlike the ORPP. Ontario had better options that would have avoided many of the above issues. It could have created a voluntary pooled saving plan with automatic enrollment, more similar to the Saskatchewan pension plan, with a better take-up rate, even with an opt-out feature. Other provinces like British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec also offer similar kinds of legislative framework for people who would be better off with this kind of a plan. The Liberals failed at their option, which was to push for an expansion of the CPP, which makes more sense than the ORPP. Canada Pension expansion focused on those households with modest incomes, such as raising the replacement rate of working income to 35%. Perhaps when this plan fails, be strong enough to deal with a modest expansion that would be acceptable to governments across the country. Instead of proceeding with the ORPP, it should be killed. It is a major mistake in policy terms. Much has been raised about the expense to administer, and there's no question that there are some parts of the makeup of the ORPP that in fact make it more expensive to administer. When you compare the number of people paying into CPP, that's in the entire working community across the country. This one is not. It's not even across the province. People moving in and out of the province will have to be tracked. Comparable defined contribution plans will be developed by many businesses, reducing the need for the ORPP, thereby increasing per unit administrative costs for those in the plan. Taxpayers will be on the hook for shortfalls. Someone must bear the risk with downturns in the economy. That goes along with the Liberal government's egregious benefits they offer to party insiders. We already know that very well-paid individuals, the first CEO of the Ontario Retirement Pension Administration Corporation, last earned almost $500,000 as the Pan Am Games. Despite these egregious wages, we are seeing then the definition played out of what the government thinks is arm's length. The appointment of two Liberal insiders that have a track record for exuberant salaries, cost overrun, and close ties to the Liberal government does little to quell the fears regarding management and the estimated $300 million a year in administrative costs surrounding the Premier's new pension scheme. The question of a funding shortfall. Within Section 45 of the legislation, it determines that the ORPP administrative group has the power to slide the contribution rate of 1.9 up or down 0.2%. Additionally, if the above measure fails to achieve the funding shortfall, the ORPP administration has the power to change the accrual rate. The accrual rate is the rate of interest that is added to the principal of a financial instrument between cash payments of that interest. For example, a 6-month bond with interest payable semi-annually will accrue daily interest during the 6-month term until it is paid in full on the date it becomes due. If both these measures fail, the ORPP administration will return to the government to enact its power in some means to address the funding shortfall. That means find more money. This leads me to question if this plan, less equipped than the CPP, will fare so much better. Shortfalls and unfunded liability are a common fear felt today. If history is the best indication for the future, I truly fear that the government's general revenue be faced with funding the shortfall. Right now, Canada's economy is growing, but it is weakened by the collapse in commodity prices and a lackluster global economy. Outside a recession, this is the worst possible time to enact a $3.5 billion payroll tax. Ontario, in its economic picture, is the largest sub-national debtor in the entire world. Just one alarming distinction. Its debt is $294 billion, or over $21,000 per capita. Net debt to GDP is up 48% in the past 10 years to almost 40%. Last year's interest obligations totaled $11.4 billion, about the same as the cost of community and social services. I doubt many Ontarians realize how much they are paying just in interest on the provincial debt. It averages $840 per person every year and rising. Not surprisingly, Standard & Poor's downgraded Ontario's bond credit from AA to A+, citing a very high debt burden and a very weak budgetary performance. The timing of this ill-conceived plan further risks the fragile state of the economy. The ORPP has continually evolved as a revenue tool each and every time it looks to absorb as much money from the economy as possible. The Chamber's latest survey shows that 44% of businesses will cut jobs or freeze hiring because of the ORPP. That's the Ontario Chamber of Commerce with its ability to check with its members and see how they will be responding. And obviously cutting jobs or freezing hiring is not a positive. It certainly won't increase the number of people able to take an ORPP. ORPP administrative costs are expected to range between 130 and 200 million, are expected to range between 130 and 200 per member per year. So a worker who contributes $800 per year will lose up to 25 of their contributions off the top in fees alone. That doesn't sound like a very good return on investment to me. Ontarians won't be saving more. They will just be losing more off their payroll stub. The Premier has said that the mandatory Ontario PIN will be good for the province, yet recent studies show that 90% of small business owners are opposed to the ORPP. An employee making $45,000 a year would pay just shy of $800 towards the ORPP, while their employer contributing with their employer contributing an equal amount. While larger businesses may be able to absorb these added costs, smaller businesses will be forced to either reduce the size of their workforce or the hours those employees are able to work. The creation of an Ontario-only pension plan will risk any immediate and future federal government stimulus in Ontario. I found it very helpful to examine the ORPP's impact on different socio-economic groups. The poor will be squeezed most by a payroll tax as they struggle to make ends meet. Middle-income workers will take home fewer savings for RRSPs and TFSAs, a down payment on a home, mortgage repayment, or their children's education. Seniors will never truly draw a meaningful benefit. As we heard earlier from the member for Nipissing, first of all, they don't have a job right now. And secondly, a pension takes about 40 years. As for the well-off, it is hardly a public policy concern if some wealthy people are less affluent in retirement, which in any case a provincial pension would do precious little to address. Now let's address the government's core concern. First, I acknowledge a few, like the Broadband Institute, have come to the conclusion that Canadians are approaching retirement with totally inadequate savings. However, this position seems to be an outlier. The Federal Department of Finance notes, quote, Canadian retirees achieve relatively high levels of income in retirement. That's a quote from the former chief economic analyst for StatsCan, Philip Cross. he said, "There is no crisis for the current generation of retirees." End of quote. The Montreal Economic Institute's Michael Kelly-Gagnon concluded that only a very small portion of Canadians are ill-prepared for retirement. The Fraser Institute points out those expanding public pensions would reduce private savings, disadvantage younger Canadians, impose a significant tax on the middle class, and be less cost-effective than private plans. The C.D. Howe Institute pointedly wrote that, quote, "In making the case for the ORPP, the province exaggerates the gap between what Canadians save and what they need to save, almost beyond recognition. Studies after studies by multiple different groups have arrived at the same notion. If this isn't to help those without a pension plan, then what are the true motives?" It's important to note there are two distinct groups of employees. There are those who have some type of pension benefit, which will be put to the government's test of an annual contribution rate of 4% for each the employee and the employer, respectively, totaling a yearly contribution rate of 8%, and those individuals who have no pension with their employer, which then both the employees and employers will be forced to contribute an annual rate of 1.9, respectively. This then forces the remaining pension and benefit programs either to increase current pension benefits to employees which meet the government's interpretation of
Never mind waving.
those with no pension with their employer will now be forced to contribute, both employees and employers, to an annual rate of 1.9, respectively. This then forces the remaining pension and benefit programs either to increase current pension benefits to employees to meet the government's interpretation of comparable, which would result in higher costs, salary freezes, and layoffs, or the cheaper and more likely option, collapse their existing plans and roll their employees into the less likely beneficial ORPP. This further makes me wonder why the government would force this on businesses and Ontarians. In the last year, the Liberals passed Bill 56, an act to establish the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan Advisory Corporation, or the ORPP-AC, which is to act as the government's neutral third-party administrator of the pension plan. However, from Bill 56 under Section 2, duties of the entity, it states, investing contributions. The administrative entity shall be responsible for investing the collected contributions for the benefit of the members and other beneficiaries of the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan. Who else other than pensioners benefit from their mandatory payroll contributions? If pensions are created for the benefit of the pensioners, an issue arises when asking the government considers being, when asking who the government considers being the other beneficiaries. This ambiguity surrounding the wording in the legislation allow for the Liberal government's influence and manipulation of further investments. Recently, the government proposed amendments to Regulation 909, eliminating the 30% rule for pension investment aid. Background in the 2015 Ontario Economic Outlook and Fiscal Review, the province announced its intention to eliminate the 30% pension investment rule. The Liberal government was recently caught in an underhanded move, have to have some amendments considered to Regulation 909. The 30% rule is one of the most quantitative limits contained in the federal pension investment rules, which Ontario incorporates by reference. This rule in Section 11(1) of Schedule 3 of the Federal Pension Benefit Standards Regulation states, "The administrator of a plan shall not, directly or indirectly, invest the monies of the plan in the securities of a corporation to which are attached more than 30% of the votes that may be cast to elect the directors of the corporation." The federal pension investment rules currently have exemptions from the 30% rule for certain corporations, real estate, resource, and investment corporations, if the stipulated disclosure and undertakings are provided to the regulator. It is proposed that a plan administrator would no longer be prevented from investing in more than 30% of the voting shares of any corporation. A threshold percentage could be established above which certain disclosure requirements or undertakings would apply. Possible requirements that may apply to the plan administrator and the corporation of if the plan invests in more than the threshold percentage of that corporation's voting shares are described below. Behind all the technical legislative amendments and regulations, in simple terms, the government is trying to change the law to fund their own Ontario-based projects, which will future tax revenue from the ORPP. This Liberal government will even try to change federal law to cover its tracks, to finally face the overwhelming infrastructure deficit, which it will achieve by getting control on all the cash by diverting the new payroll tax to provincial infrastructure projects. Political interference in pension management is generally shunned because it is a sure way to compromise returns and jeopardize retirement savings. When I think of the Liberal motivations, the word shameful comes to mind. The most important item of note did not come from this legislation. It was a line that was quietly announced in Ontario's in a recent budget, which state, and I quote, "By encouraging more Ontarians to save through a proposed new Ontario retirement pension plan," it reads, "new pools of capital would be available for Ontario-based projects such as building roads, bridges, and new transit." With the current legislation, it is to the discretion and interpretation of the ORPP Administration Corporation to make investments that they consider to be the benefit of members and other beneficiaries. The above-mentioned ability, in concert with the questionable purpose announced in the budget, draws into question the true motive of this pension plan. It is of great concern that the goal of this program is for the fiscally challenged Ontario government to gather as much money through a new payroll tax for the purpose of pooling funds for new provincial infrastructure programs. I'm wondering if, since I've come to the end of a particular section, we might recess at this point. I'm asking recess at this point because I'm at a particular point in my remarks where I'd like to begin tomorrow.
Okay, I guess we could go on for questions and comments because I can't recess the House this early.
Okay, if not, then I'll continue. You should keep going. Okay. All right. I want to then elaborate on the point that I was making earlier about the importance of what pensions are for. Pensions are for pensioners. And it's very clear when you look at the mandate of the Canada Pension Plan. CPP and their investment board mandate is set out in legislation. It states that CPP investment board's objective, quote, is to invest its assets with a view to achieving a maximum rate of return without undue risk of loss, having regard to the factors that may affect the funding of the pension plan and the ability of the Canada Pension Plan to meet its financial obligations on any given business day. And so I think it's really important for viewers to appreciate. It's very clear that these are the rules for CPP. There's not the fuzzy question of other beneficiaries of the Ontario retirement. The benefit of members and other beneficiaries in the ORPP, as well as the excerpt from the budget document, which then said allow more Ontarians to save through a proposed new Ontario retirement. New pools of capital would be available for Ontario-based projects such as building roads, bridges, and new transit. And I think that motive then becomes extremely important in understanding the complexity of this initiative for all Ontarians. It's very clear from the material that I've presented this morning that it is not in the best interests of poor people. It is a burden to those middle class because it reduces their choices in savings. And one of the other things that is sort of an interesting light in terms of the position taken by the government. When the first bill was being introduced, I and my other caucus members on the committee wanted to introduce an amendment that would raise the minimum entry age from 18 to 19, and the Liberals voted that down. So then we tried 20, and then we tried 21. And there was obviously certain frustration with the other side. Why are you doing this? And we said, well, because between 18 and 25, many young people are in many different part-time jobs as they're working their way through school, or they're getting new jobs, or they're looking for one. They have education debt to pay. And you're taking the money from them when, in fact, the return on that money will come at age 65. And maybe they don't contribute for more than a couple of years in their youth. And then they either are somewhere where Ontario has no jurisdiction, or they have a different kind of pension set up. They don't have an ORPP. This hardly seems like a fair way, and it doesn't seem like we're trusting these people with their own money to make the right decisions. But no, you are eligible to contribute from age 18 to age 70. The complexity of this is also illustrated by the number of acts that are affected and the technical responsibility in bringing these. So I'll just give you a sense of the breadth of what will happen. There's acts that are affected: the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System Act, the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan Act, the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan Administration Corporation Act, the Pension Benefits.
The member was kind of hoping that this would end for now, so I think I'll cut it off.